Hello everyone, and welcome to your first lecture of the semester. This lecture we're going to be discussing attraction, attractiveness and relationships. So why is attraction important? Well, all social animals will experience attraction, and as humans are social animals, we seek social interaction, and we seek social interaction with those who we find attractive. Now, this can be platonically, you are attracted to someone's friendship, but in this sense we are discussing romantic attraction and sexual attraction. Attraction allows animals to find allies and mates. We need to feel attracted to others in order to be able to judge whether we want to make them our friends or our lovers and be in a relationship with them. Social psychology tends to focus on the negative human traits, such as aggression and prejudice and intergroup behaviours. But social psychology would do well to focus on happy aspects of social interaction, such as love and relationships. So, the first thing we'll discuss is one of the big arguments in attraction psychology, and that is the nature versus nurture debate. So what determines attraction and attractiveness? Well, the response from the nature side of the debate would be that attractiveness is determined by evolution. Some research evidence suggests that universal standards of attractiveness are important, and if a standard of attractiveness is universal, indeed if any behaviour is universal, it probably has some kind of biological basis. So therefore it's been nurtured by evolution, and it makes you one of the stronger, it is one of the stronger characteristics, because obviously if people have these characteristics, they're more likely to mate and reproduce. So universal standards of attractiveness imply that some types of attractiveness are determined by evolution. Now this is really interesting because there are some types of attractiveness, there are some indicators of attractiveness which change cross-culturally. Now that would indicate a nurture influence of attractiveness. However, researchers found that participants rating faces from different nationalities and ethnic groups were found to agree in terms of attractiveness. So even though some things do change across cultures, quite a few things were agreed upon. So there's a consensus both within and between cultures about what makes people attractive. And there are some universal characteristics that are considered attractive throughout most cultures. These include being happy, being friendly, and being emotionally mature. Also, success and sociability. So, now that we've covered some of the basic aspects of the nature debate, let's delve in a bit deeper as to the evolutionary foundation of attractiveness. Evolutionary social psychology offers insight into strategies adopted to select a mate. So basically, evolutionary social psychology helps us to understand what things people look for in a mate based on evolution. Biologically based standards of beauty suggest that both males and females prefer facial features that indicate likely reproductive fitness, such as symmetry, averageness, and sexual dimorphism. Now, symmetry is just that, having a symmetrical face, where one side of your face is symmetrical to the other. Averageness indicates that your face is unremarkable. So there's nothing that sort of particularly makes your face a bit strange, a bit different. Basically, attractive faces are those where, although it might be very pretty, there's nothing that particularly sticks out. And sexual dimorphism is essentially taking the binary perspective of looking at sexuality by wanting women to look very, very feminine and wanting men to look very, very masculine. Now, of course, if you observe the dates that this was published in 2006, at this time we didn't have as much of a good understanding of the non-binary gender perspective. And so it'd be interesting to redo this study now and see if people who, perhaps people have changed their ideas about sexual dimorphism, or perhaps if this study was conducted within the LGBT community itself, where people do engage in more relationships within and between non-binary people. So it'd be interesting to see how that might have changed over time. That being said, if you take the evolutionary perspective, it's not likely to have changed over time. As with the sexual dimorphism, the evolutionary social psychology perspective splits their understanding of what people are looking for in a partner down the gender binary. So, evolutionary social psychologists would say that women prefer men who demonstrate indicators of the ability to protect and support their offspring. Now, this is the status resources dimension. So therefore, they're more likely to go for older men. Men can reproduce throughout their lives and may become slightly more knowledgeable, wealthier, and willing to settle with one mate as they age. So women prefer slightly older men. For example, Harrison Ford, Bruce Willis, and George Clooney have all been considered to be silver fox heartthrobs. Also, women look for strength. Men who are physically weak are less likely to be able to protect their families, and so women prefer lean, muscular men, demonstrating a level of physical fitness. For example, Mark Foster, Vin Diesel, Jean-Claude Van Damme are all examples of strong men who are considered attractive. And finally, power. Men who hold some power in society are more likely to be able to provide for their family, and so therefore women prefer powerful men. For example, Barack Obama and Elon Musk, although I have to say perhaps Elon Musk's a bit more of a strange one. Now, men prefer women who demonstrate indicators of fertility and ability to care for their offspring. This is the vitality attractiveness dimension. So therefore, men are more likely to go for women who are of a younger age. Younger women are likely to be more fertile, and so men prefer those with useful, cute features, such as large eyes and a small nose. Examples include Selena Gomez and Ariana Grande, who look very youthful. Men also prefer women. I appreciate that I'm using very general terms here, but according to this theory, who have an hourglass figure. So both obesity and excessive thinness are likely to result in ill health and reduced fertility. So men prefer the classic hourglass figure with a waist-to-hip ratio of 0.7. Now, examples of this include Marilyn Monroe, Beyoncé, and Christina Hendricks. So these biological explanations of attractiveness fail to explain gay attraction. Theories to explain same-sex attraction from the evolutionary perspective have included the following. Individuals who are unlikely to mate or raise young successfully can promote the continuation of their genes if they direct their efforts towards supporting the young of their siblings rather than having children of their own, and thus gay behaviour prevents wasted efforts on attempting personal reproduction so that the individual can focus on supporting their nieces and nephews. So basically, according to the evolutionary perspective, if you are a weak male or female and therefore wouldn't be particularly efficient at raising young, you give up on the concept and decide to dedicate your time to promoting your bloodline by looking after your nieces or nephews instead. Now, again, this isn't a particularly politically correct or inclusive perspective, but it is one of the several explanations for homosexual behaviour and gay attraction in evolutionary social psychology. However, there is little empirical evidence to support this theory and the underlying assumptions of this theory, including the fact that very many people who are in homosexual relationships would be really quite desperate to have children and would love to have children and have to try really hard to find other methods of having children. And so the theory is there, but when you look at behavioural practice, it doesn't really stand up to reason. A further theory is brain feminization. Now, brain feminization occurs in all men in order to install feminine traits and make them attractive to women, such as empathy. But over-feminization occurs in some men due to genetic variation, and so these men might experience same-sex attraction. Again, this is just a theory. It's an interesting theory, and it doesn't explain lesbian relationships, but it does attempt to explain gay men relationships. But again, there is little evidence to support this theory, and gay men do not always exhibit other feminine traits consistent with the theory of an over-feminized brain. As we know, being gay doesn't particularly correlate with any personality. You can be gay and it not come out in your behaviour in any stereotypical way at all, or it absolutely can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's got anything to do with your sexuality. And so again, this theory it doesn't particularly stand up to scrutiny. And finally, a third theory is that gay behaviour reinforces bonds with other males, and this can contribute to survival by increasing social support and access to resources. So this would be support between males rather than competition. So basically, and it's another assumption that gay men are weak and can't look after themselves, and so find other gay men because it's safety in numbers. So none of these theories are particularly, nice and inclusive, but then unfortunately, science doesn't have to be. But I'm not sure that I don't particularly agree with any of these as it stands. So, yeah, we'll see if anything comes up in future. But again, explaining gay behaviour with biology, it's going to have its pitfalls because complex human emotions can't necessarily be explained away by saying, yes, well, brain function. So... Right, we've covered nature. So now let's get on to the nurture argument. Some research evidence suggests unique standards of attractiveness for different ethnicities, countries, societies, etc., thus implying a social basis for attraction determined by culture. So basically, all around the world there are going to be different perspectives on what is attractive, and those perspectives vary massively over time as well. For example, when I was in university about 10 years ago, when I was an undergrad, it was absolutely the done thing to be incredibly skinny. Now that was obviously not healthy, although it was promoted in magazines, and if you had our celebrities who are considered to be sort of sex gods and sex goddesses now, and compared those to back then, you'll find they're actually quite a lot heavier, because nowadays we focus more on health and fitness, whereas previously it was very much a thin ideal culture. But again, this differs wildly across the globe. So if attraction can change based on time and based on your culture, then can it really be considered to be down to nature? Research suggests that people do tend to prefer partners from their own ethnic group. And so again, your attraction to other people might be associated with nurture and people who you engage with a lot. But again, this doesn't explain attraction in multicultural societies, where people are in relationships with people from many different ethnicities and cultures. Research has also revealed some strong cultural differences in ratings of attractiveness. As I was saying before, slimmer women in European countries tend to be rated as more attractive, whereas heavier women in African countries tend to be rated as more attractive. I'm actually from a Latino family, and being very skinny would be considered not very attractive at all in Venezuela. And in fact, I've got a cousin who's a very successful model, and she would probably be in the UK about a size 12 to a 14, whereas which is considered very attractive in Venezuela, whereas in the UK, 12 to a 14 would be considered plus size, which is again not unattractive by any stretch at all, but considering it to be plus size possibly indicates that it doesn't fall within the remit of what would be expected, in your average magazines. Individualistic societies such as America and Britain, etc., tend to associate attractiveness with traits such as strength, assertiveness, and dominance, whereas collectivist cultures tend to associate attractiveness with traits such as empathy, honesty, and generosity. So again, depending on where you are in the world has a massive influence on who you might find attractive, because it will depend on how you're raised. People in the UK might be attracted to someone who is very independent and is happy to be in a relationship but doesn't particularly want to be crowded, or perhaps someone is very attracted to the concept of dating and marrying a woman who has a strong career. Now, in other countries, being individualistic, wanting your own space, and particularly women wanting to go to work and have a successful career might be considered to be not attractive at all and something to be actively avoided. So again, we have those social differences. So there's no right answer between whether it is nature or nurture that most influences attractiveness, and realistically, it's probably a combination of both. So what does the research say actually influences attraction? What factors might make a person attractive? We're going to have a look at several different factors influencing attractiveness, all of which have been supported by research. So, appearance. We're more likely to be attracted to someone who has an appearing physical appearance. We want our partners to be in good health. We want them to be able to support us, to support our family, and to have healthy children. So having a partner who looks healthy will be considered to be very attractive. It's evident to most people that we prefer straight white teeth to rotting teeth, slimmer bodies to obese bodies, and clear skin to spotty skin, for example. And we also prefer symmetrical features. We tend to be attracted to people who have body symmetry and face symmetry. One interesting study found that women sniffing men's t-shirts preferred those that had been worn by symmetrical men. This finding is, however, only indicated when the women are ovulating. So when women are the most fertile, they are more likely to be attracted to men with symmetrical face features. We also prefer average faces, so we tend to be attracted to average faces rather than unusual or distinct features. So unfortunately, this actor's out, and this guy's in. Our next factor is proximity. So as previously discussed, proximity influences friendships, and it also influences attraction. We're more likely to be attracted to someone and develop a relationship with them if they're physically close to us. So people living in a block of flats are more likely to be friends with their neighbours located on the same floor than on other floors. Now this seems quite obvious. Basically, it's probably to do with the fact that the other person is available to us so much. And so the interaction requires little effort or cost. So if you consider an economic perspective, the best deal for you is something that gives you a lot, but you don't have to pay much for. It's the same with friendships, with building friendships and relationships. If someone is physically present, you don't have to invest your time as a cost into building a relationship with them. So basically, having people close to you makes it more likely that you'll build a relationship with them. Now, proximity may also influence attraction because there's an expectation of continued interaction, so it'll be uncomfortable to dislike the person. So, basically, you have this underlying want to get on with people that you're going to have continued interactions with. And so you might be slightly more forgiving of nuances of their personality or behaviour that might irritate you in people who otherwise you wouldn't see so much. So basically, you're a little bit more forgiving of people who you expect to have consistent interactions with. And if you're more forgiving of them, then you're probably more likely to become attracted to them. Proximity may influence attraction as well because it's closely linked to familiarity, which is our next factor. We're more likely to be attracted to someone as we become more familiar with this person. The mere exposure effect suggests that repeated exposure to a stimuli results in greater attraction to that stimuli. For example, students were found to rate a new student as more attractive the more often they were exposed to her. Now, this doesn't necessarily just happen with attraction and relationships. This can happen with anything from your first taste of something, you might not like it, although over time you are exposed to it over and over again, and so you do, to a song by Justin Bieber that you hated when it first came on the radio, but you find yourself singing along after the 14th time you heard it that day. So this same thing happens with people. The more you see someone, the more you might get to like them, unless actually you didn't particularly like them that much at all to begin with, and then it might just get worse. Unfamiliar stimuli tends to make us feel anxious and less likely to feel attracted to that object, and so having this familiarity makes you more likely to feel attracted to that person. Evidence for this comes from research that's found that people do not usually like mirror reversals of their own face or the faces of others. So they're very familiar with their own face, but if they see their face as a mirror reversal, they don't rate it quite as highly. A further factor is reciprocity. Now, this one's pretty simple. We're more likely to be attracted to someone that we know is attracted to us. So the reciprocity principle is associated with the law of doing unto others what they would do unto you. In the case of attraction, the reciprocity principle refers to the tendency to like someone who likes us and dislike someone who dislikes us. This is supported by research that found that students who believed that other group members liked them were more attracted to the group. Reciprocity is a major determinant of attraction, but it is mediated by personality and situational variables. So you're not just going to like someone because you found out that they fancy you. In fact, that can be quite off-putting. These situational variables also have to be in their favour. So people with low self-esteem are more likely to be influenced by reciprocity. If you've got very high self-esteem, then someone demonstrating that they're attracted to you might not particularly sway your opinion because you feel used to people being attracted to you, or because your self-esteem is high enough that it doesn't bother you whether people like you or not. And people will attach different values to appreciation by different people. Again, this is highly linked to self-esteem. Praise from a stranger is valued more highly, than praise from a friend or partner. And so if you find out that a stranger likes you, you might be more likely to be inquisitive about that connection. Whereas if it's a friend, you might think, well, yeah, of course you like me, you know me, I'm great. But also praise from someone attempting to gain favours is likely to be devalued. So if you realise that they're flirting with you, but that they can also gain something if you were to flirt back, then you might not necessarily be likely to reciprocate their attraction. People will be influenced by the pattern of appreciation. So the gain-loss hypothesis suggests the following paradox. We tend to like people more if they initially dislike us, but then begin to like us. But we tend to like people less if they initially like us, but then begin to dislike us. So if you meet someone who doesn't initially like you and then you grow on them, then you're more likely to go, oh, okay, great, yeah, this person's actually nice. But if they initially like you, but then go off you, then you're not likely to return their initial attraction. This effect is not just reciprocity, because the person does not simply like you. Instead, it's a pattern of appreciation over time. Perhaps this is due to the feeling that those who like us more over time have got to know the real person and so value us more highly. And so we respond to that appreciation with a more confident type of affection, a more confident type of attraction, because we feel like that person has truly got to know the real us over time. A further factor influencing attraction is that of similarity. So we're more likely to be attracted to someone who is perceived as being similar to us. Initial attraction appears to be closely linked to proximity, but similarity becomes more important in long-term attraction. So ultimately, the more similar you are to someone, the more likely you are to have a long-term relationship. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be similar in all ways. For example, you could have very different hobbies and very different interests. But if you are similar to someone in your values, in what's important to you, such as family or enjoying nature or enjoying downtime, being active, things like that are the things that would be more likely to be the building blocks of a happy and long-term relationship. Researchers found that students sharing accommodation were initially attracted to other students in the same living quarters, but ultimately developed relationships with other students who had similar attitudes. Now, the law of attraction highlights the importance of similarity in relationships. This law states that attraction towards a person is positively correlated with the proportion of similar attitudes to that person. People are reinforced by others confirming their attitudes, their thoughts, and their preferences, and so they're likely to feel positive towards that person who has reinforced them. Basically, if someone has the same opinions as you, you think that therefore the both of you are right, and that person making you feel right bolsters your self-esteem and makes you more likely to be attracted to them. Assortive mating refers to our tendency to seek a mate who is closely matched to us. And evidence suggests that people are more attracted to those who match their physical appearance, social background, personality, interests, and hobbies, etc. In fact, a longitudinal study of married couples confirmed that spouses who remain married for over 21 years were initially similar in many aspects, including age and education. Again, if you are relatively similar in age, it's expected that you might have relatively similar experiences. And if you're relatively similar in education, this might mean that you have similar kinds of conversations. Again, values are the most important. People rating opposite gender faces for attractiveness rated one that had been morphed with his or her own face as being the most attractive. So you see, similarity research isn't just your values and your hobbies, it also extends to having a similar face. So if you have a partner who people say, oh wow, you guys look quite similar, then that might be why. The next factor is personality. Now, we're more likely to be attracted to someone who's perceived to have a good personality. In fact, it's one of the most common desires in single people seeking a mate, and one of the most important factors in those people engaged in a relationship. But the only issue with that is, what actually is a good personality? Questionnaires exploring the determinants of initial attraction in romantic relationships, same-gender relationships, and opposite-gender relationships, found that a desirable personality was rated as the most important. But of course, people vary wildly in what they think a good personality is. For example, your friends will think that you have a fantastic personality, but other people perhaps that don't like you, or you don't like other people, you might think that they don't have a good personality. But again, their friends probably think they do. So that varies massively. Now, a really good way to find out about someone's personality is to go on to our next factor influencing attractiveness. This is self-disclosure. We're more likely to be attracted to someone who has disclosed to us or to whom we have disclosed. The social penetration model states that people who share more intimate discussions with their friends are closer with those friends. And disclosure will give us the impression of being close to another person, and so we're likely to respond to that by increasing our own level of attraction towards them. We feel that sort of closeness and intimacy if we tell people things that we don't necessarily tell everyone else. Disclosing personal information and being sensitive in response to the disclosures of others is crucial in a personal relationship. So having this sense of trust and intimacy increases your likelihood that you'll be attracted to them and that they will be attracted to you. Self-disclosure will establish a sense of trust, induce a sense of safety, and decrease feelings of vulnerability, and therefore it will generally strengthen the relationship or increase the likelihood of building a relationship with someone. Now, our next factor is smiling. This is really simple. You're just more likely to be attracted to happy people. You're more likely to be less severe with them in your judgments, and you're more likely to want to be around them more. Indeed, students who smile are punished less severely after a misdemeanor than those who don't, so it even extends to your life as a student. Our final factor is self-esteem. Having self-confidence will impact on the perceptions of others. Research compared men using an aerosol spray containing fragrance and microbial agents or none of these agents, and women rated the men as equal in attractiveness in photographs, but rated those using the active aerosol as more attractive in a video clip. Women obviously could not smell the men in the video clip, and so the smell must have had an impact on the behaviour of the men. Men who smelled good had increased self-confidence and were thus perceived as more attractive by the women. So, bit of a strange study, but really quite interesting. In short, feeling that you're attractive improves self-confidence and leads others to view you as attractive. Interestingly, the perceptions of others will also impact on your self-confidence. Self-esteem and ratings of own attractiveness were found to drop if the individual believed that an unattractive person had expressed an interest in them, particularly female participants. So, bit of a strange one there, but again, the opinions of others can influence your self-esteem. So, a good way to ensure that you are attractive to others is to try and make sure that their opinions don't bother you so much. Now, that brings us to the end of this part of the session. So, it would be great if you guys could pause this video, have a break, and come back in 10 minutes after you've got a bit more of a refreshed brain. So the last part of the session was about attractiveness. This part of the session discusses relationship formation. After this session, you'll be able to discuss the concept of love, describe different types of relationships, describe and evaluate the processes involved in starting a relationship, and describe and evaluate the processes involved in ending a relationship. So let's start with the concept of love. What is actually the definition of love? Well, it can be defined as a combination of emotions, cognitions, and behaviours involving intimate relationships. There is a difference between liking, loving, and being in love. Liking might indicate a desire to spend time with a person. Loving might indicate a desire to trust a person. And being in love may indicate a desire to have sexual relations with that person in the instance of someone being in a sexual relationship. However, you can be in love with someone that you are not in a sexual relationship with, but in general, being in love indicates your desire to be in an intimate relationship with a person. But other than the very basics, can we ever really actually define love? Now, I'm going to use examples from the TV series Vampire Diaries to illustrate my points. However, everything that I discussed you can apply to your own understanding of love and perhaps your own characters in different TV shows that you guys enjoy watching. I don't know what's popular to watch anymore, so I went with Vampire Diaries, and maybe you've watched that? So, Hendrik and Hendrik identified 5 key styles of love. First, we have passionate or romantic love. Now this is eros. This is a state of intense absorption in another person involving physiological arousal. They emphasize romance and beauty, and it's characterized by feelings of tenderness, desire, elation, anxiety, jealousy, altruism, and pain. It's a type of deep infatuation and the kind of love that a lot of people fall into straight away. Before this intense honeymoon period fades and you have a more solid kind of love built on emotions rather than lust. These relationships do not tend to last long. This level of intense passion cannot be maintained, so unless it develops into another kind of love, these relationships tend to crash and burn. Now, the next type of love is companionate or friendship love. This is storge. This is a caring and affection for another person that usually arises from sharing time together and develops slowly. It's characterized by feelings of friendship, concern, understanding and warmth, and it's a strong, stable and enduring love. So this is the kind of love that you might have for your best friend. It's not necessarily a romantic love at all. The next love is pragma. This is a logical love, a pragmatic approach to relationships requiring only that the other person is compatible and meets your basic needs. There's very little drama, but there's also very little passion. It's very much an exchange kind of relationship. You meet my needs, I meet your needs, we might as well go out. People carefully weigh up the costs and benefits of the relationship, so it's very much an economical perspective of relationship. But it is characterized by feelings of contentment and satisfaction. The person does meet your needs, you just don't necessarily have that fiery passion for them. Then we have possessive love, mania. So this is the kind of love that you might want to avoid. This is an emotionally intense dependency on the other person, requiring constant attention and togetherness, and is characterized by feelings of jealousy, obsession, and anxiety. These relationships, again, don't last particularly long. They're very emotionally draining, and it's better to find a deeper kind of connection where you can build a trust. Finally, we have selfless or altruistic love. This is agape. This is the kind of love that you would want to find, the kind of love that you would want to have in a relationship. This is an unconditional caring for the other person. This is characterized by feelings of giving, kindness, tenderness, caring, and forgiveness. Some people believe that only God is truly capable of agape love. So if you want to have a long-standing and successful relationship, you want to have a bit of agape, a bit of storge, and a bit of eros as well. You don't necessarily want to have any mania whatsoever. So, back to what is love. Is love an innate human behaviour, or is it a cultural phenomenon? As with attraction, there are biological aspects to consider. Now, it's difficult to determine whether love exists independently of culture. We can't remove someone from a culture and see if they still fall in love. You can't remove someone's nurture and only focus on their nature. But research indicates that love does appear to exist in every recorded society. Now, this does suggest a biological basis for love. Of course, love could also be a nurture or culture-based phenomenon. The concept of romantic love is simply a descriptor that's applied to three interacting variables. And this three-factor fit theory by Hatfield and Wolster identifies these three components. The first is cultural determinants acknowledging love as a state. The second is the presence of an appropriate love object. And the third is emotional arousal when interacting with that love object. An interaction of these three factors will result in the application of the term romantic love. So of course we do need to have culture in order to have love. because without the acknowledgement that love is a state, we simply wouldn't be able to define it. Bit of a strange one, actually. But is love such a simple process? Many people live in cultures and have the concept of love and interact with desirable potential mates, but they don't fall in love with all of them. Now, our culture has this concept of love, and we all know multiple people that would be an appropriate love object for us. However, you don't fall in love with every single person who's simply available, and you don't fall in love with every single person who you feel an emotional arousal around. I've got loads of friends who make me emotionally happy when I'm around them, but I'm not in love with every single one. And so this concept of the cultural phenomenon of love is actually not as easy as it tries to be. This model implies that love is based solely on physiological arousal, but most people feel there is a difference between love and lust. So now that we've got to the point where we've understood what love is, to the point where we possibly ever can, we're going to discuss starting relationships and ending relationships. So why do we choose to start a relationship with someone? It must be because we're attracted to them on some level. And there are two broad types of theories that help us to understand why we might start relationships. The first are reinforcement theories, and the second are economic theories. Now, Lot and Lot's direct reinforcement model is a very simple model, and it suggests that we will like people who are present when we receive reinforcement. It's very much like a Pavlovian concept of building a relationship. This model is drawn from the concept of classical or Pavlovian conditioning, and evidence reveals that non-involved bystanders were liked more if they were present when the participant was rewarded, and liked less if they had been present when the participant was punished. And so again, we see how having an experience, having any kind of reinforcing or punishing experience can have an influence on our attitudes towards the people that were present at the time. And so if you were rewarded when someone was physically present, then you might be more likely to associate that person with that rewarding sensation. Now, the reinforcement affect model is very similar, but the model focuses specifically on feelings, so that's where the affect comes from. So, reinforcement affect model states that we like people who are present when we experience positive feelings. So it's not a behaviour, it has to be feelings. When rewarding stimuli induces positive feelings and punishing stimuli induces negative feelings, and so we are more likely to like someone if we feel that being around them will result in those positive feelings. For example, if you enjoy running and you're full of endorphins and on a runner's high, and then you meet someone whilst you're in this mood, you might associate them with this runner's high and associate them with that rewarding sensation. Background neutral stimuli associated with reward or punishment would elicit similar feelings in the future, and therefore people can be liked or disliked depending on whether they are associated with positive or negative feelings. Indeed, participants presented with neutral statements from a stranger tended to like the stranger less if they were seated in uncomfortable conditions during the presentation. So, making sure that your surroundings are positive and that people will experience positive emotions when they are around you will make them more likely to like you. Now we'll move on to our economic theories. The first is social exchange theory. Now this is based on principles of economics, so you're more likely to be attracted to someone where the benefits of the relationship far outweigh the costs of being in the relationship. So this cost-reward ratio refers to the calculation of what it will cost to engage in the relationship versus the benefits, and you want those benefits to be more than the costs. So let's take this example of a rich old man and a sexy young woman. Now, for the woman, the cost of being in the relationship with this man might be public embarrassment or personal distaste. So she's not particularly attracted to him, and she might be quite embarrassed that he is her boyfriend. But the benefit for that relationship with her is she has access to money and resources she ordinarily wouldn't. With the man, he might have a risk of infidelity. He might not be as attractive to her as she is to him, and she might cheat on him with a younger and more attractive man. However, the benefits of being in a relationship with her are having this attractive young woman on his arm, this personal pleasure, and public pride. So the cost-benefit analysis of that relationship is sort of very much in skew of the benefits. In fact, it was a very rich man going out with a young woman, and I can't remember who either of them were, but the woman was asked, would you be attracted to Bob if he wasn't rich? And she said, no, I wouldn't, but he wouldn't be attracted to me if I wasn't beautiful. So basically, that was a very good example of this social exchange theory. Essentially, we adopt a minimax strategy of seeking to minimize our costs and maximize our rewards of any interaction. So profitable relationships are more likely to be pursued than non-profitable relationships. The social exchange theory focuses on this cost-benefit ratio, and so both people want to have a positive outcome. Our next economic theory is equity theory. Now again, this is based on the principles of economics. Now, slightly different to the social exchange theory, equity theory states that we'd be more inclined to seek a relationship with someone if the relationship is fair, if the costs and benefits are fairly distributed between the parties. So attraction will be greatest in the fairest relationship, but resources must be distributed equally between partners in order for the relationship to be successful. Inputs in the relationship must be deemed equal to output in the relationship in order for it to be successful. And this focuses on the equity experienced by both people in the relationship and the effect of this perceived equity or inequity on the relationship outcome. Our final few slides focus on ending relationships. So why do we end our relationships, and how do we end our relationships? Well, perhaps we recognise the deterioration of a relationship and respond appropriately. But what are our processes of dissolving a relationship as well? In order to make a relationship, then you have to go through processes of building that relationship. So how do you actually end one? Well, first you identify the deterioration indicators. Now, relationship deterioration can be indicated by 4 key factors. The first is that a new life seems to be the only solution to the issues that you're having. Perhaps you've identified an alternative partner by which your cost-benefit ratio would be improved. Perhaps you expect that the relationship will not survive, and so you jump before you're pushed. You kind of think, oh, I'll end this relationship and leave with my head held high before the relationship ends by another way. Or, of course, just a lack of commitment to the relationship and wanting to explore other options or being single. Now, deterioration of a relationship can result in positive or negative and active or passive responses. A positive passive response is loyalty and waiting for an improvement to occur, whereas a negative passive response might be neglect and passively allowing this deterioration to continue. A positive active response would be voicing behaviour and working at improving relationships. So saying why you dislike certain aspects of the relationship and working to build trust with your partner so that the relationship improves. But then a negative active response would be exiting behaviour, actively choosing to exit the relationship. Now, if you actively choose to exit the relationship, you go through several stages of relationship dissolution. Now, these were set out by Duck in 1998. The relationship dissolution model charts the 4 phases of the dissolution of long-term relationships. The first is the intrapsychic phase. This is the period of brooding with little outward indication of problems. Partners are unhappy and dissatisfied, but perhaps they passively hope that the relationship can be improved. So you don't actually say that there's something wrong, but you know deep down that it's not necessarily working out. It's easier to stay than to leave, so you just wait it out and hope that it improves. If that doesn't work, however, you move into the dyadic phase. Now, this is a period of interaction between partners in an attempt to decide on action. This involves big arguments or ultimatums and discussion. Partners may argue and attempt to repair the relationship or attribute responsibility for the relationship problems. Now, at this point, you move on to the social phase. This is a period of social interaction to establish social supports. They might even negotiate with friends to gain support, and third parties will sanction the dissolution and distribute blame. Essentially, what this means is your relationship is over, you know that your relationship's over, and so you seek comfort in your friends. Your friends will tell you that you didn't do anything wrong, that it was the other person, and you get to feel a bit better about yourself. The final and slightly morbid stage is the grave dressing phase. Now, this is a period of negotiation to determine a socially acceptable version of the life and death of a relationship. So, partners may divide property, access to children, and attempt to establish a positive self-image in the face of relationship end. They will also make sure that the way that they present the relationship end to their friends makes them appear to be the most reasonable partner. Now, this concludes our discussion of relationships, and this also concludes our lecture. This is your first lecture in social psychology, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed experiencing the format. Now, you won't actually be actively assessed on this. The content of this lecture will not be in your quizzes, but it might be an option for a question in your exam. Of course, your exam is a seen exam that you have a week to work on, but you needn't study this lecture for your quizzes. This lecture was just to get you into Introduction to Psychology and to get you excited about social psychology. Also for you to practice the format of these kinds of lectures. So thank you very much for coming, and I will see you again next week.